Hello, and welcome to the Future of Decision Now podcast, where we have real, candid conversations with thought leaders, practitioners, and tech experts about AI, decision intelligence, and the future of work. I'm your host, Fred Laluyo, CEO and co-founder of Era Technology. Today, we're going to be talking about reason-driven decision-making and its impact on digital transformation and the future of work. I'm very pleased to welcome thought leader and author Brian Evergreen, CEO of the Future Solving Company. Brian, welcome.
Thank you so much, Fred. I'm glad to be here.
Good to see you again. Last time we met in the office in San Francisco, was that a couple of months ago, maybe? And we said, look, we need to talk some more. And where are we finding you today?
I'm in Washington today, so not in San Francisco. I'm missing the sunny weather, but enjoying the fall.
Great. Well, glad to have this chat with you. Why don't we start with some intros? Introduce yourself. I think you have a super interesting background that led you to think the way you do and do what you do and write what you're writing. So tell us a bit more about yourself and your background.
Sure. So my background, I started out as an internationally competitive chess player. So I used to represent the US versus other countries. And I think that really shaped the way that I think from a strategy perspective, especially. And also the way that I think about decisions, which we'll speak about a little bit more. And then I studied music theory and composition in school, which also, you don't go into that field thinking you're going to get into AI or necessarily business at all. But in retrospect, it all makes sense. Writing symphonies and singing and collaborating with people in choirs and orchestras has a lot to do with leadership and a lot to do with different decisions and creativity and that you're applying to manifest and create music together. And so bringing that into a context from a business perspective is fascinating. And so then I joined Accenture a couple of years after graduating from university and worked in strategy, worked for Microsoft as my first client, and saw that analytics and data and AI was all going to be an important field. And so I dove headfirst into that and networked, within Accenture and with folks at Microsoft and dove headlong into that space and learned as much as I could. Ended up leading, initially smaller scale, then over time, larger scale initiatives. And then later joined Microsoft as the head of AI strategy for Microsoft US. And later in Microsoft Research, I led autonomous AI co-innovation globally. And so that's where, my passion for autonomy and this era of transformation coming beyond digital transformation, which I call autonomous transformation that we've already sort of crossed the chasm into, has become a major focal point for me and is why I wrote the book and left Microsoft last year to help organizations navigate and position themselves for this future.
Fascinating. So the chess, the music, the consulting, the AI leadership with Microsoft. Then you left Microsoft and you started the Future Solving Company. So tell us a bit about what it is, and we'll talk about your book later. But I'm excited about this conversation because you have some really interesting thoughts. About the topic that's keeping me busy for the last 15 years. So tell us about Future Solving Company. What do you guys do?
Absolutely. So the Future Solving Company is based on one of the concepts that I proposed in the book, which is that we need to augment problem solving, which we're all naturally very good at, which is the craft of getting rid of what it is that you don't want. We need to augment that with future solving, which is the craft of getting what it is that you do want. And so our natural tendency as something we've inherited from the Industrial Revolution is to eliminate problems. Because if you think about a mechanical system, the system goes down, you eliminate the problems, the system goes back online. And but when you only ever focus on problem solving, you're never going to have breakthrough innovation, because breakthrough innovation happens when you select a goal or a future that you want to solve for, and then you work backwards from what would have to be true for us to create this future. And so the Future Solving Company, what we do is we partner together with organizations and with sometimes individuals, but majority is with organizations that want to solve for this future in the era of AI. And we set aside any given tool or technology, and we start with the question of what do we want to achieve? What value do you want to create in the market? And work backwards from that. And it may be that AI is one of the tools that would be critically important to create that value, but sometimes it isn't, and that's okay. And help them create the strategy to achieve that future or that goal that they set. And my overarching goal is to really help organizations create a more scientific way of making decisions across their organizations.
So that's how you and I connected on that topic, obviously. And what I been using as a tool internally in the different companies I've had a chance to lead is prospective hindsight. You know, I discussed that, which is
Yes,
basically I'm doing what you're doing, which is like, hey, where do we want a company to be in a year or 2 years? And imagine that we're there and we ask ourselves the question, what is it that we did well back then, which would be now, that
right.
allowed us to get there? Because you look at planning, you look at these processes, you're trying to cover every single aspect of an organization. And when you're scaling fast, you come up with those list of KPIs, OKRs, you name it what you want, that are just, pages long. And you
That's right.
forget to do what really matters, what is really going to unlock the opportunity to bend the curve. And in
That's
my
right.
business, it's all about bending the curves. You're not supposed to be successful because you're always competing against giant organizations that are stronger, more established with more firepower. So to win, you have to bend the curve. So I think that's where you and I connected on that approach, and I love how you structured it, and are now able to guide other organizations. So you talk about reason-driven decision making.
Yes.
So how did your work with business leaders has helped shape this framework? Talk to us about that reason-driven decision-making framework.
So this is one of my favorite things in the whole world to talk about. So I'm glad you asked. And that what it is that when I started out as the head of US AI strategy for Microsoft, working with Fortune 500 companies on putting their strategy, crafting their strategies to unlock the opportunity of AI, starting back in 2019, I thought, okay, well, obviously we want to be data driven and we want to choose the problems that we're going to solve, right? All the commonplace, status quo of if you go to any conference today, you're going to hear, start with what problem you're going to solve, pick a use case, be data driven, right? And what I found was that I uncovered that being data driven is actually unscientific, which tends to surprise most people. But
Totally.
I promise I'll defend it, which is that the scientific method, of course, of course, but I'm going to just say it for the sake of illustrating the difference, is making an observation or asking a question, forming a hypothesis, conducting an experiment, analyzing the results of your experiment, and then drawing a conclusion. But what we do in data-driven decision-making today is we make an observation or ask a question, check, that's the same. We form a hypothesis, okay, that's the same. But now, instead of conducting an experiment, we gather data from things we already did or things we found in Gartner, IDC, or Forrester, and then we analyze the results of that. And then we draw a conclusion, which is our decision whether or not to invest in something. And then we begin the experiment. But instead of saying it's an experiment, we say we've proven in advance how long this is going to take, how much it's going to cost, and we're going to tie your performance to it. And so if we applied that methodology to cancer research or to any other field of science, all research would cease because we don't have data to justify the investment unless someone else already did it. And so
Yep.
if we truly want to be innovative and make breakthroughs, we have to document something beyond what we can account for in data, which is our ability to reason. And a lot of times we until now, I have not seen or found any kind of system that documents all of our reasoning and logic from the future we want to create, just like you talked about with, the backwards planning, to where we are today, all the unknowns, all the things we would have to figure out. We tend to sort of go for something like OKRs, where we say, this is the goal. Here's 2 steps between here and that goal that we're going to measure ourselves on this quarter. And we'll figure out the next 2 steps we want to take next quarter. And that doesn't necessarily route the whole path from where you are to where you want to be.
Is it because it's so hard to get data that first of all, when we have data, we think the data is going to be the answer? Or is it really because it's so hard to align resources in a large organizations toward a common goal that we're trying to use data as the way to rally people around an idea? I mean, why is this? Because what you're describing
Yes.
makes complete sense. Me as an entrepreneur, I've been using a very similar approach, and that's why I was so excited when we met. I was like, oh my God, you're talking about what I've been doing, but I've been doing it for tech companies, which is a very specific environment,
Right.
working with the largest companies in the world, which I understand is what you've been doing as well. So why is this? Why are we not using that common sense logic that you're describing here?
You know, it's a great question. I would say that the main reason that I found is that we want an authority other than ourselves to
Mhm.
be able to blame or to be able to point to. And data represents something like that. Because if I can outprove you with data, then you're going to have to go with that. And it's not really your opinion versus mine. But it fundamentally breaks down because what happens is you might have your top experts working on something for months, coming up with a plan and a strategy and a vision for what they should achieve. Then you go to your review, your approval meeting, and you get one paragraph and a set of numbers. And everybody's eyes immediately jump to the numbers. They'll hear the overall exec summary, but they're really looking at the numbers. And then if they don't like the profitability equation on something, it gets nixed. And unfortunately, if that's a step between where you are and the future that you want to create, that now you have a problem. And so having an actual map from the future you want to create to where you are today and all the theories and hypotheses that would have to be true changes the conversation, because now you can say, this is the future we're trying to create, or this is the goal we're trying to achieve. These are the things we've all agreed would have to be true. This is our proposal for how we want to test this
Mhm.
hypothesis efficiently. And if someone says, well, I don't like the profitability on that, hey, me neither. So let's brainstorm together. Now it's you and me versus the problem instead of you versus me. And just changing the conversation, because right now in most organizations it's you versus me, is who has the better data to be able to point to, and then we end up getting in trenches and throwing numbers back and forth. And frankly, the amount of wasted human potential and strategic thinking that goes toward warring internally instead of toward creating value in the market is probably one of the biggest mishaps of our working society.
It'd be super interesting to see how your approach has helped actually create disruptive companies, because I think you cannot scale a disruptive company if you don't think the way you're describing it. But of course, your approach is to help structure the methodology and shake things up for large organizations. So how has that approach, the reason-driven decision,
Mm-hmm.
solved the challenges of the companies that you're dealing with? Can you give some examples? How are leaders using that framework?
Great question. So there's one example is a Fortune 500 company that's baked a multi-billion-dollar moonshot on this. And what they started with was there was a disagreement happening within the organization and about whether or not they should do a given thing. And it was similar to the numbers, and should we just increase capacity, or should we actually try to build this new kind of way of creating the value that we create? I'm trying to be as open, and while also being as enigmatic as I need to be for the sake of not disclosing anything that's confidential. But what they ended up doing was they set all of the differences aside. They set the organizations aside, the different departments within the organization, and instead said, "What? Okay, let's get out of the context of our day-to-day operational, putting out fires, and let's start with what is the future of our market that we not that we want to react to. Yeah, sure, we can look at the trend lines and guess where it might go, but irrespective of that, where do we want it to go? Where do we think would be the best possible thing for our customers and for the market and for our partners and our ecosystem? And then, okay, can we create that regardless of the trend lines? Like, sure, the trend lines can inform the discovery of what would have to be true or what would have to change, but we're instead going to focus on what future do we want to actually create,
Yeah.
and take the agency for creating that, instead of planning to be reactive to that or planning to be future proof, so that even when these things happen, hopefully we'll still stay standing. Instead, saying what are the differences that we can make that would actually cause everyone else to scramble to figure out how they're going to catch up to what we've done. And then documenting, to your question about how the framework supported that, actually documenting the unknowns, because so often we have these amazing offsites. We've all been there, we've all been to them, and then we go back to our all the fires in front of us, all the unread emails that we have to get back to. And so having an independent sort of a new way of doing strategy that bakes the meaning, the why into it, as well as documenting all of the unknowns and assigning accountability for testing and proving theories and hypotheses, and then looking at the market and seeing where are all the other organizations spending capital to test and prove these theories and hypotheses true or false, that we can just monitor capital that others are allocating, and we can benefit from that. Right now, there's so much untracked progress where there's, NIST or the National Science Foundation or someone else is already spending capital, and they have top researchers trying to figure something out. And we don't necessarily, in most of our organizations, have visibility to where the overlap between that is and what we're trying to figure out. And so that's one example of a layer of a new way of doing strategy that really is more scientific and allows for the best possible allocation of resources, moving from where you are to where you want to go.
So many thoughts when you're describing this, and that resonate a lot with me. The first one is, how does a large organization with being pushed by activists on Wall Street coming into their board and asking for short-term performance improvements, and that are just running after one quarter the performance to another and doing some short-term improvement, how do they approach this? And how is your vision or your methodology, your approach, helping them get out of the day-to-day scramble to just stay alive?
Great question. So I would say that the methodology that I've proposed is, I think, best suited for innovation, but it also supports when you're trying to improve your operational efficiencies as
Yeah.
well. And so I think, for example, when you talk about activist investors, one example is if we were to look at, we want to be carbon, neutral by a given date. Many organizations have made commitments about that. And then they've turned to incremental improvements in hopes that they'll get from here to there in a lot of cases. I don't want to speak for all of them, but very few organizations have actually documented what are all the things that would have to be true. What are some areas where maybe we don't even know what it would be, but we do know there needs to be a scientific breakthrough for us to be able to achieve that. And in the flip side, to your point about activist investors, what are the things that would have to be true for us to be able to actually turn off our reliance on, coal, for example, right? Because as of right now, for our society, if we shut it off today, it'd be a matter of maybe days, maybe a week before complete chaos, and our society would devolve, and all the electricity and the internet, everything would stop, right? And so one of the things that would have to be true is we would have to have enough supply of renewable energy to be able to transition away from coal before we shut it off and completely. Okay, well, what would have to be true for that? And what other organizations are working on that and being able to provide visibility? Because I think when there's a lack of transparency or visibility into the vision and the strategy and the things that would have to be true, then people assume that nothing's happening or that they're not working hard enough. So being able to be transparent and say, these are all the things we believe would have to be true. This is the area where we feel is core competency for us. So that's where we're going to focus. These are the areas that are adjacent, and we're leaning on suppliers or partners to help us either co-develop, or we're asking them, maybe leaning together as a coalition in the industry, asking the supplier to create this capability that will support that. And then this is the area where we're going to need that. Like, for instance, if it's a reliance on the grid, and the grid is, not the right blend of renewable energy yet, and we don't have a way to self-generate, we're either going to need someone to create a way to self-generate at the level that we require, or we're going to need a breakthrough in a completely reimagined grid. And neither of those are in our nexus of control. And so, but within ours, these are the investments that we're making, and the progress that we're making.
So fascinating. This is the Future of Decision podcast. So I want to hear your thoughts, and I'll share mine, if you don't mind as well, on,
of course,
how does this connect to decision intelligence?
Do you want to go first? Or you want me
No,
to?
you go first.
So I'd say the way that it connects to decision intelligence is that decisions, and I'm guessing you'll agree, are one of the very much guessing you'll agree. Decisions are one of the most, it's one of the most, if not the most important element of any business. And yet it's largely unexamined for most organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And so decision intelligence is a piece of the same puzzle, solving for another aspect, I think, of the same problem, which is being able to actually see and understand and digitize what are all these decisions that we've made and that we're considering. What are all the risks we took? What are all the risks we didn't take, to be able to actually learn and improve our decision making over time? So I'd say that there's a parallel there, because the reason-driven framework is a point in time it's an ongoing exercise, but it's a manual exercise. And I would say decision intelligence augments that.
Yeah, and
Is my
I think
perspective.
there'll be a, even when I think about our software, there'll be an opportunity to bring this kind of framework in the tool. There are two thoughts that come to my mind. The first one is aligning the decisions to the framework that you're describing, because today it's kind of the difference between strategy and execution. This gap is huge. You have a company that has 9, 10 layers of hierarchy. People are scrambling to keep things afloat and running, um, and to drive the day-to-day execution, which is really revealed by the decisions that companies are making. You talked about sustainability. Do I ship my container that way or that way? That has an impact on all this stuff. It's too hard for people to comprehend the impact of their decisions on the multiple business dimensions across the value chain. It's simply too hard. That's why we're organized through big pyramids, because we're going up and down,
Mhm.
hoping that the person on top can make that decisions because they have either more experience, better tools, more authority, ability
Right.
to take risks in a way that I don't have, and they have visibility into a higher, by definition, if they're higher up in the pyramid, they'll see they have a wider spectrum of visibility. So connecting the decisions that you're making every day, from very operational to planning to a strategy, is absolutely fundamental. The second is a topic that we use a lot these days. Is I think decision intelligence puts the human back in the center of the decision-making processes. And what I mean by that is, if I can automate, or if a company, not I, if a company can automate, millions of decisions, and we're doing this today with some of the largest companies in the world, which is fantastic. By the automation, you give visibility, you give control, you can move the way you make decisions, but you also free people to plan, to think, to collaborate, to execute on the vision you're describing. And that's fundamental, because I see folks today are in this massive reorg fatigue. They keep jumping, and we take the matrix and it's like this, and now we're shipping like that, and we're putting back 2 years later. People are just like, okay, I'm going to wait until the matrix come back the way it was 3 cycles ago. Their job doesn't fundamentally change.
Right.
And I think at this point in time, it's absolutely fundamental to free people, to put them back in the center, to allow them to be part of that discussion, to allow them to be part of that strategy definition and execution. Especially, and I'd love to get your thoughts on A, what I've just said, but B, also on the timing of the book and the approach around the AI revolution. I completely understand that this is not an AI book, but do you see that the AI FOMO, or fear of missing out, and the opportunities and the threat that it creates, is accelerating the need for autonomous transformation?
Absolutely. I think the FOMO, but also I think the level of complexity is probably the biggest piece. Because if you think about, if you're trying to decide whether or not to move a workload from on-premise to the cloud, the list of considerations is relatively short. You're looking at capabilities, you're looking at change management, upskilling, cost considerations. It's relatively simple. And so the leadership system and the decision-making system that we brought into the 21st century based on what we inherited from the Industrial Revolution was still fit for purpose, I'd say, even in the early stages of digital transformation. But when you come to the topic of artificial intelligence, even when we got into blockchain, like, we weren't ready as a society to start making like cross-systemic considering all the complexities of the overlapping of all these systems that we've built our society on. And so we would meet up with the complexity and think, oh my goodness, that would take a whole coalition. That's so complex. Let's just focus on some quick wins. Let's just put some points on the board. We'll make some incremental improvements. We'll make things a little better than we found them. When my 3-year term is over, then I'll go do it somewhere else. Right. And so I don't mean to sound too
No,
sarcastic,
you're right.
but the thing that I say is that, in our society today, if you think about one of my favorite things to challenge people to do is think about your favorite building, the most beautiful building that you've ever been inside of. And if you picture that building, and then you imagine being at the moment where the people who made that building came together to make the plan for how they were going to make that building. Did that conversation, do you think they said, let's start with some hammer and saw use cases and work our way from there? Or do you think they started with, wow, okay, if we want to create Duomo, for example, could we even do that? What would have to be true for us to do that? Where would we get the materials? Would that be possible from a, from a physics and a mechanics perspective? And so if we think about where we're at today, we've inherited systems of value, systems of record, systems, processes that existed and inventions that we've been building our whole society on that we've inherited. And it comes with its benefits and it comes with its, it's the the downsides as well for us as society and humanity. And we can, if we want to, we can just incrementally improve. And that, to your point of everything you said about decision making, there's not a lot of risk with the decision to make incremental improvements, at least in the short term. That's the safest possible bet. Or we can say, all right, now we've inherited what we've inherited. What world and what future, what society do we want to be in? And how can we create that? And it's much bolder. It takes more strategic thinking. It takes vulnerability. It takes being able to learn from the risks that you've taken, or also the risks that you haven't taken, which most organizations today only ever account for the risks taken, which naturally incent people to focus on risks that are low bets. But if they were also being accounted for all the risks not taken and regularly, let's say biannually reviewing, all right, Fred, these are the three risks you took this year. These are the 12 risks you didn't take. Look what would have happened if you had taken that risk. That would have paid off immensely. And then you can learn. But I think in our organizations, we're, I think in a lot of cases, afraid or just not examining our decision making to the degree to be able to, have that kind of culture within our organization of really looking at, reflecting on all the decisions we're making and not making, and how those are impacting not only the bottom line, but also in most cases, the biggest missed opportunity, especially with AI, is top line growth.
I'm smiling at so many thoughts going through my mind when you're talking. The first one is when we launched Era 7, 8 years ago, we invested quite a bit of money in building that video, Welcome to the Self-Driving Enterprise. And that
Yes.
looked completely nuts at the time. And I remember showing it the first time, and people were like, yeah, they're delusional. I said, yeah, I am delusional today, but this is the vision and this is what we're going to build. And I wanted to put it in images. And we're 8 years into the journey. The category is defined. The technology works. We're digitizing millions of decisions with the largest companies in the world. And I wouldn't change a single word. I mean, I haven't changed a single word from that initial video. That's basically what you're saying. The other thought that came to my mind is, having built disruptive technology solutions all my career in software, I've always said the same thing to our salespeople. I say, look for folks who didn't have a standard trajectory inside those large organizations. If you've had a very traditional trajectory, doing your grade school and moving with your degree every 3 years from one job to the other, you're unlikely to take risks, to really try new things that are going to expose you. But if you are someone who has had a very different trajectory for many reasons, I'm not going to go in detail that, then that's usually probably the people that are going to be more receptive to the kind of disruptive concept that we're carrying with our vision and our technology. So you kind of echoed that a bit earlier in your point. Super interesting. We're going to be running out of time, so I think we should do that again. Always enjoy chatting with you, and always feel like you're putting a framework around a lot of the thoughts that I've had personally, and maybe explain why we build the technology. And I'm glad we had a chance to cross paths. So you got a lot going on. To learn more about the topic, you folks should be reading the book Autonomous Transformation. Is there anything else that you want to highlight from the book, Brian?
There's so many aspects about the book that I could talk about all day. I'd say, so we talked about future solving and the reason-driven methodology. I'd say the only other one that I think is important to call out is that I think that it's not in the book actually specifically, but it is a part of this era of autonomous transformation that we've begun to move into. Is I think that the next wave of real transformation we're going to see is autonomous AI agents, not to be confused with intelligent automation, which is also critically important for organizations. And it's not that you need one or the other. But I'm really excited and write often on Substack or different articles on this future that we're moving toward. And but if people want to learn more and stay up to date even beyond the book, I also have a course that launched on LinkedIn Learning earlier this month as well. And so that's a resource that others, depending on how much bandwidth they have to read books, might find helpful. It's only 48 minutes, so it's a quick, they can get through it pretty quickly.
All right, Brian. Well, listen, thank you for sharing your insights, your vision, and your time with us today. Really enjoyed the conversation, as always. Hopefully, we'll have one more conversation soon. Good luck with the book and everything that you're doing. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me, Fred.
All right. So this concludes our Future of Decision Now podcast, reason-driven decision making. You can view today's podcast on our website at eratechnology.com. Thanks again, Brian.